Okay, so still talking about the Dome of the Rock. We were talking about the base earlier, and we can see that the dome on this structure is definitely more commanding and more obvious on this piece than a lot of the Byzantine or the late antique structures that feature domes. And the exterior has been restored. The tiling is from the 16th century onward. And so it's hard to get a sense of what the outside or the exterior of this building actually looked like originally. But the colorful patterns are still quite typical of Islamic ornamentation. And it is quite different from what we looked at in the previous chapters. So the Byzantines liked brickwork, the Greco-Roman sculptures in the pediments and things like that, or columns were very common, although there are columns present on the Dome of the Rock. And but it is quite different from the structures that we've looked at in the other chapters. So the mosaics ringing the base of the dome in the interior are actually, oops, sorry about this, are actually original. So on the base of the dome, they're intact and suggest what the original appearance of the exterior walls probably look like. And funnily enough, none of the inscriptions in the structure tell us anything about the rock structure that this building was built around. The structure was designed around this rocky outcropping. You can kind of see it down here. That features an underground cavern. And obviously there's a reason why they built this structure over this rocky area. And it's most likely that the Muslims agreed the rock was sacred in some way, but we don't have any clear details or writing as to the meaning of the structure or the rock. Some scholars hypothesize that the rock was the location of Adam's grave, or where Abraham was going to sacrifice his son Isaac, or the place where Muhammad began his miraculous journey to heaven. Others say that there are traces of footprints on the rock that many believe are God's footprints and were left there at the time of creation. And they also believe that God might return to that same spot during the Last Judgment, or the time when basically the world ends. Another example that they think might be an explanation is that it's the altar of the Temple of Solomon. So there are a lot of different theories as to the significance of the rock, but obviously it was some sort of spiritual significance, but we're just not exactly sure what exactly that is. And we do know the Dome of the Rock is not a mosque. A lot of people think it is, but it's not. There are some clues as to the meaning of the structure, and they can be found in the surviving original mosaics in the interior of the Dome of the Rock. And they depict crowns, jewels, chalices, and other royal motifs that probably reference the triumph of Islam over Byzantine and the Persian empires. So, there are some Quran inscriptions that are present, and the main theme is that Islam is the superior new religion. So it basically is saying that Islam is better than both Christianity and Judaism, and it's really thought to be an architectural tribute to the triumph of Islam, is really what they think the Dome of the Rock, what its purpose is. It's the triumph of Islam. And it helps to mark the coming of the new religion to the city, and it tells the people of the city that Islam is superior to the other religions. So the Umayyads were in power during the time when the capital was transferred from Mecca to Damascus. And the Umayyads were basically the family that took over after Muhammad passed. So Al-Walid purchased an old Byzantine church dedicated to John the Baptist, and before it was a Byzantine church, it was the Temple of Jupiter, which was Roman, and Al-Walid demolished the church but repurposed some of the stone and certain elements from the previous structure to make the mosque at Damascus, the Great Mosque at Damascus. So we'll look at that next. So this is the interior of the Dome of the Rock. I didn't actually go over the slide, but it just shows it in more detail. And it gives us some original mosaics survive. So it kind of gives us an idea of what it originally looked like on the outside too. So here's the Great Mosque at Damascus in Syria. And this is built, like I said, by Abd al-Malik. Or no, sorry, al-Walid made this one, actually. So this is an aerial view of the Great Mosque of Damascus in Syria, 706 through 715. And it takes a lot of stylistic influence from Roman and early Christian architecture, partially because a lot of it is reused materials from structures of those eras. The Islamic builders reused a lot of stone blocks and columns and capitals salvaged from other previous structures. There are some pier arcades reminiscent of Roman aqueducts that frame the courtyard. You can see here. And there are 3 minarets, which are architectural structures that are specific to Islamic mosques. And there are these tall tower-like objects here. These are minarets. There's 3 of those, 2 on the south end and 1 on the north end. And they were originally Roman square towers that were then kind of transformed into these Islamic-style minarets that are specific to mosque structures. And the tall prayer hall is on the south side of the complex and faces Mecca, and it is placed similarly to where a temple would be in a Roman forum, actually. And the facade of the prayer hall features a pediment and arches, which are borrowed from Greco-Roman and Byzantine influences. So you can see the pediment, arches, and things like that. And it's a little bit taller. This is the prayer hall. So a lot of early Christian and Roman influences, because partially they're reusing Roman and Christian buildings to make this mosque in Damascus. The Islamic elements are the mihrab dome, the minabar, the minaret. So a mihrab is a niche in the wall of a mosque or religious school that indicates the direction of Mecca. And Muslims face Mecca when praying. And it is the architectural and symbolic focal point of the religious buildings. A mihrab is a dome that is placed above the prayer niche or mihrab. So this is the dome, and the mihrab would probably be over here, and this is Mecca. You know, we're facing Mecca. And these are the minarets here, which are the towers. And yeah, the mihrab is the dome. And actually, let's see here. A mihrab dome, sorry, that's the mihrab dome right here. And the minabar is basically kind of a staircase or a platform at which the prayer leader or imam stands when delivering a sermon. So just kind of going over some of the, features of most mosques. And we'll go over those again later on in the chapter too, in a little bit more detail, actually. Glass mosaics once covered the walls of the Great Mosque at Damascus, and it depicts, palatial villas, trees, gardens, rivers. They owe a lot to Roman and early Christian art, and the gold in the background actually suggests that to historians that Byzantine artists were responsible for the mosaics, because Byzantine art features a lot of gold in it. So the vegetal borders present are reminiscent of Roman or early Christian or Byzantine designs. So once again, the mosaics reflect influences from other cultures. There are no depictions of animals or humans allowed in Islamic art. That's something to always remember. The Quran did not state it, but the Hadith did. And it shuns the representation of fauna or figures in sacred places. So this is basically a rule of Islam, that they just do not depict figures or fauna in their art. So we end up seeing these sacred Islamic spaces. We see a lot of pattern, abstract forms covering the walls, inscriptions, calligraphy, that kind of thing. So there's a lot of depicted scenes of gold at Damascus in the mosaics. And they think that, the historians are thinking that this is kind of a reference to the image of paradise, The imagery is really consistent with passages from the Quran describing the gorgeous places of paradise, gardens, groves of trees, flowing streams. And the notion of paradise is kind of an element that's present here and in the iconography of Islamic mosaics as a whole. And obviously, even some in the Dome of the Rock, inside the Dome of the Rock, which is what we looked at earlier, have some references to paradise. So we'll be moving forward. So the Umayyad caliphs maintained power for nearly a century, and they constructed many structures, including the palace at Mashhad in Jordan around 750. So this is the plan of the Umayyad palace in Mashhad, Jordan. It's very symmetrical. Okay, we'll just move on here. Years of civil war kind of ensued, and eventually the Abbasids, who claimed descent from Muhammad, overthrew the Umayyad caliphs. And so they were kind of the next family to take rule, the Abbasids. And these new rulers moved the capital from Damascus to Baghdad in Iraq in 762. So the capital is moved once again, which happened to be actually near the old Sassanian capital of Tesfion, I believe. And in these early times, Baghdad was often referred to as Medina al-Salam, which translates to the city of peace. And it was also called the Round City because it was circular in plan, and it was about 1.5 miles in diameter. And the circular shape was symbolic of how Baghdad was viewed at the time. It was thought of as the center of the universe, so they made it circular. And the idea of a round city was actually borrowed from ancient Assyria. Places in Persia used the same layout for their great cities. And the ancient city of Baghdad had a moat and 4 gates oriented to the 4 compass points. And at the center was the caliph or ruler's palace. So that's kind of what Baghdad looked like back in the day. No traces of original city remain, but Baghdad did remain the seat of Arab power for almost 300 years. And the Abbasid caliphs were very wealthy, and during their rule, many Greek texts were translated into Arabic and were the only copies to survive and used by scholars in medieval Europe, which I had mentioned before. And the Abbasid caliphs were able to establish a lot of diplomatic relations throughout the world, going as far out as Germany. So very sophisticated culture. The Abbasids constructed the location of Kairouan in Tunisia, and it is one of the best preserved early mosques. So let's see, this is it, Kairouan in Tunisia. So this is in, I believe, in Iraq. No, Tunisia, sorry. So this is the aerial view of the Great Mosque in Kairouan, Tunisia, 836 through 875, and its design resembles a hypostyle hall, and it's thought to be inspired by Muhammad's house in Medina. And the carved wood minibar, or the pulpit or platform or recess where the Islamic version of a preacher stands to deliver sermons or lead prayers, dates back to 862, and it's the oldest known minbar, I guess. And the Great Mosque in Tunisia is large. It's 450 feet by 260 feet, so it's quite large. We can take a look at the plan of the Great Mosque in the next slide. And I might have to go over this in the next video because there's actually quite a bit to go over here.